Trojan Horse War, Part 2, Abyss, Chapter 4. After he finally dug out of his orbital assault suit, Charlie detached one of the oxygen packets and hooked it up to his breath mask. Putting it on, Charlie was now mobile enough to go up to the cockpit and get an explanation as to what was going on. "He's our hostage," Rex said by way of introduction as he pointed to the man in the flight jacket and mechanic's overalls. "Are you going to get in the way when we get to the mall?" Charlie asked. The mechanic just shook his head. He doesn't even seem fazed for a hostage. "I've been through the red flag operations before," the mechanic said. He pointed to the GP5 rail repeater Charlie had hanging across his chest. "I know you only have simunition in there." "We've got live rounds with us in case we need to use them," Charlie responded. "Are you the reason we took a detour into Philosian space?" Freddy nodded and patted his satchel. "This is the reason we took a detour into Philosian space. I told Parthenon Approach and Republic Fleet Net East we had some navigational trouble. I think Titus cleared things up for us. Bet we're going to have some explaining to do to him when this is all over, though," Rex said. They were still flying over the ocean, but they'd hit the east coast of the Republic territory in just a few minutes. "I'm not going to have to explain anything," Charlie said. "It's not going to be an issue," Freddy said. "Is that our escort?" He pointed to two fighters approaching from the left, F-550s. Rex got on their channel and made arrangements to be brought to the mall air and spaceport. Rex banked the craft as they soared over the Chesapeake Bay. In less than a minute, they entered a holding pattern over the A&S port. "They've given us a priority slot on account of the damage we incurred and Titus wanting his private plane back and fixed. Get your guys back in the container," Rex said. Charlie went back into the cargo bay with Freddy right behind him. Freddy rerouted the secondary exhaust back outside the craft and the commandos took off their oxygen masks. They squeezed back into the container and Charlie lifted the side into place and turned the latch that secured it. The black-clad red flag team bounced around as Rex brought Admiral Titus's private orbital craft in for a landing. Rex kept Charlie updated as to their progress over the radio. "I'm taxiing into the hangar. The Marine guards are looking at me kind of strange, but that's just because of the damage. I just finished up with our hangar security officer. I'm going to have the loadmaster bring the container down." Charlie could tell from the motions when they were loaded into the forklift. "They're driving you to Fleet Hall. Next time you stop will be it. You'll be out of my visual range any moment now." Charlie turned on the red lens flashlight under the barrel of his repeater. The other commandos were getting to their feet and getting their repeaters ready. Sergeant Royner and Sergeant Billings were poised on either side of the container hatch. Sergeant Royner had one hand holding the pistol grip of his repeater and the other on the latch. If things went the way they expected it to, they would encounter very little resistance. While this was an exercise to test security, there was some danger involved. Charlie's team only had simunition in their repeaters. Instead of steel-jacketed rail rounds, they had paint rounds. They stung whoever they struck and left a red stain, but they were not lethal. However, the Marines and Fleet MPs that acted as a security force at Fleet Hall carried pistols and rifles with very real ammunition. The team could feel the forklift stop at 2 points as it stopped at checkpoints. Then it accelerated as it went down a ramp. 10 minutes later, they could hear the distinct sound of a freight elevator door closing. This was it. Charlie gave Sergeant Royner a signal. Royner threw open the hatch and rolled up the door. Sergeant Billings was out and pointing his repeater at the forklift driver an instant later. Charlie hit the stop button on the control panel as Sergeant Matthews climbed on top of the container, opened the service door at the top of the elevator car, and climbed out. The rest of the team followed. Sergeant Billings already had the forklift driver in plastic cuffs behind his back with duct tape over his mouth. The NCO was explaining to the driver that this was just an exercise and that he'd probably be freed within an hour if everything went as planned. Until then, he was going to be sitting quietly in the container. Sergeant Billings put on the driver's blue cap and jacket and took his seat on the forklift. Charlie nodded to him as he climbed out the hatch at the top of the car. "Take it back to the basement," he said to Billings, who could reach the control panel from where he sat on the forklift. On top of the elevator car, Charlie saw Sergeant Matthews leading the 6 other black-clad commandos up the steel rungs of the ladder that protruded from the wall of the shaft. Charlie swung his repeater around on its sling so that it was hanging from his back, and he stepped onto a rung just as the elevator dropped out from under him. The team climbed rapidly, with Sergeant Matthews reaching the top of the shaft in 15 minutes. The big motor that powered the elevator whined to life. Billings must have stalled as long as he could, pretending to have trouble with the forklift, but now someone was coming up. Matthews, Red Flag's resident elevator expert, slid along the ledge that went around the top of the shaft and stepped over into the alcove that housed the motor. As the bottom man on the shaft rungs, Charlie looked down and saw the elevator car approaching from the basement level. The buildings they were in was 11 stories high, and if the elevator was going to the top, it wouldn't take long to get there and squish Charlie in the process. He looked back and saw Matthews peering in the electrical box above the motor with a small flashlight in his mouth. Charlie looked back down and saw the elevator was 50 feet below and gaining. Back at the top of the shaft, Sergeant Toft finished picking the lock on the door that led to the roof and swung the door open. The team members highest in the shaft started scrambling up the remaining rungs and out the door as fast as they could. Charlie climbed, but the elevator was gaining too fast. Then, just as the elevator car was less than 1 meter below Charlie's boots, it stopped. "You all right down there, Chief?" Matthews asked in his Alabama drawl. Charlie smiled at the multi-talented commando in the dusty motor alcove as he climbed the rest of the rungs and went out onto the roof. Sergeant Toft and Sergeant Maxwell had 2 sailors in plastic cuffs and were in the process of duct taping their mouths. "Wait," Charlie said. He crouched down next to the sailor who Sergeant Toft had sat down against the outside wall of the cupola that housed the top of the elevator shaft. "You guys come up here for a smoke break?" "I'm not telling you anything," the older sailor, a master chief, said. Charlie sighed. At the north end of the gravel roof, Sergeant Royner was securing the door of another cupola, and Sergeant Astley was anchoring rappelling lines to a tangle of pipes. "I'm not asking you for classified information. I just need to know if many people come up here during the day to smoke. I know who you guys are. Red Flag. I was at Wentley Depot when you guys came. You cheated and we got a bad review. So if you think I'm going to... What are you doing?" Charlie had the Master Chief's wallet. He looked at the man's military ID. "Master Chief Walton. If you don't tell me how much traffic this roof gets on a day like today, when this is all over, I'm going to tell your CO that you are my inside man." The other sailor, whose mouth was already covered by duct tape, opened his eyes wide in surprise. Walton's face twisted in anger. "We see security up here once in a great while, but it's usually just us and one other guy who has keys to get out on the roof. Most of the smokers go out the front or the back and smoke over by the groundskeeper's shed at the other end of the parking lot. But if you think..." But before Walton could finish, Charlie took the length of duct tape Sergeant Toft was holding and put it over Walton's mouth. He moved across the roof in a crouch, sliding out of his backpack as he walked. When he got where Sergeant Astley was preparing 2 rappel lines, Charlie had his Swiss seat out and was putting his backpack back on. Sergeant Astley pulled on his own Swiss seat just as Charlie peered over the edge of the building. There were just a few people below, gathered by the groundskeeper's shack. Other personnel were moving around the walkways of the military base. Half a kilometer away, was the Joint Command Headquarters, and next to that was the MP Headquarters of Military Command Washington. Then Charlie and Sergeant Astley each ran a line through a locking D-carabiner and through a loop in the Swiss seat. The other men on the roof were getting together near the other cupola. They were putting on yellow plastic helmets that said Fire Rescue and putting matching patches onto the Velcro ovals on their left shoulders. Charlie took one last glance over the edge of the roof, gave Astley a thumbs up, and they both tossed their lines over the edge. They both followed over the low wall at the edge of the roof and dropped down 2 stories before swinging into a wall of the building and stopped themselves with their feet. They went down 1 more story and stopped on either side of a window. Charlie brought a special stethoscope out of a pouch on the upper sleeve of his left arm and listened through the tinted window. Hearing nothing, he dropped the stethoscope back into the pouch and brought out a battery-operated diamond-tipped drilling glass cutter. Astley already had 2 suction cups secured to the window. Charlie drew a 2-foot diameter circle with the diamond drill. Astley pulled the cut circle of glass soundlessly away, allowing Charlie to climb through, stepping onto a shelf covered with dusty hard copies of manuals. Astley carefully handed the big piece of glass cut through the opening to Charlie, who took it down and set it on the carpeted floor. Once Astley was through, they both pulled black respirator masks out of their backpacks and put them on. They rechecked their rail repeaters, and Charlie brought out a smoke grenade. He opened the door on the far wall a crack, listened for a moment, pulled the pin on the grenade, then tossed it through. He heard a whump, and the grenade detonated. Then there were a few cries of surprise, and the fire alarm started blaring. They listened to the chaos unfold outside for about 3 minutes before they heard the knock at the door. 3 knocks followed by 2. That was it. Charlie opened the door. Sergeant Royner and Sergeant Toft came in on either side of Admiral Titus, who was coughing and squinting through watery eyes. "Just sit down in the corner and you'll be fine," Charlie said through his black ski mask. As the Admiral looked at him, he seemed to realize what was really going on. "Red flag, right?" he coughed. "Yes, sir," Charlie repeated.